Hello, friends, and welcome back to Untold Tales. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. Now let's get into today's tale. This incident took place back in 2016 when I was just 16 years old and living in a small town called Maplewood. It was during the school year and I was preparing for my exams. I used to take late night classes, and one evening I got out particularly late, around 10:30 p.m. Now, there were two routes I could take to get home. One was a longer route that took about 45 minutes, while the other was a shortcut that went through an abandoned road. The shortcut was usually deserted after dark, but since I was tired and starving, I made the fateful decision to take the quicker path. The shortcut involved crossing some old train tracks and then walking about 2 kilometers past a dilapidated, long-abandoned hospital. The weather was pleasant, and I was in a good mood as I plugged in my earphones and started walking. Everything seemed normal until I reached the area near the hospital. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and I felt an intense chill, which was odd given the normally warm climate. It felt like the atmosphere had shifted, and I had goosebumps all over. But I brushed it off and kept moving. As I continued walking, I got the unmistakable sensation that someone was following me. I glanced back, but the street was empty. The uneasy feeling persisted, but I tried to stay calm. A few moments later, I spotted a woman in the distance, dressed in a long, flowing gown. From behind, she looked like an older woman I knew from the neighborhood, which gave me some comfort. I figured I wouldn't have to walk this creepy road alone after all. I called out her name, but she didn't respond. I started to walk faster, trying to catch up, but no matter how fast I moved, the distance between us remained the same. It was like she was gliding effortlessly ahead while I struggled to get closer. Frustrated, I broke into a sprint, shouting her name, but she never turned around. Then, without any warning, she vanished. I froze, my heart pounding. There was no place for her to hide, no side streets, nothing, just a long, empty road. I couldn't explain it. Panic took over, and I bolted for home, running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I burst through the door, drenched in sweat and out of breath. That night, I came down with a fever that lasted for days. When I told my family what happened, they dismissed it, saying I was just overworked and tired from studying. But then things got weirder. I started waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was stroking my hair while I slept. Shadows flitted around my room when I was alone, and I felt a constant sense of dread whenever I was in the dark. I kept it to myself, thinking it was just stress playing tricks on me, until my cousin experienced something terrifying. One evening, she came running out of our room, screaming. We were all in the living room watching TV when it happened. When we asked her what was wrong, she said that after taking a shower, she walked into the bedroom and saw me sitting by the window, staring outside. She casually chatted with me while searching the closet for something, but when I didn't respond, she turned to look at me, and I was gone. I was still in the living room with everyone else, nowhere near the bedroom. That's when I finally opened up about everything I had been going through. My family was spooked and took me to a spiritual healer. The healer read some verses, blew them over me, and told my family to keep me away from that road and never let me be alone at home. He didn't share the full reason, saying it wasn't something I should know at my age. After that, the disturbances gradually faded, and we moved out of that house a few months later. But I'll never forget that night, and I'll never walk down that abandoned road again. My brother's late-night encounter. The night was eerily silent. Shadows danced beneath the flickering light posts, and the air hung thick with dread. As they sped toward the dim glow ahead, the black figure closed in, reaching out with skeletal fingers that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Desperation gripped them as they clung to the hope that the light would banish whatever haunted them in the darkness. But as they neared the post, their hearts pounded, fearing they might not escape the grasp of death itself. This story is based on my two older brothers' experience when they were in their first year of college, back in 2013. Both of them, along with their girlfriends at the time, were heading out to visit a friend who lived on the outskirts of town near the city. There were 2 roads leading there, one that was a direct and quick route, and another that was longer, winding through a remote area. Being adventurous and feeling invincible in their youth, they decided to take the longer route. This road was notorious for being desolate at night, with no houses, just fields stretching into the darkness. The only structure along the way was an old funeral home that had been abandoned for years. People often whispered about strange occurrences around there, claiming that the spirits from the funeral home roamed the area. The road itself was barely lit, with just a few old streetlights flickering here and there. Few people ever dared to drive down it after dark. Despite the creepy atmosphere, my brothers were in high spirits, their motorcycles roaring as they laughed and joked with one another. They sped along the dark road, occasionally honking their horns, paying no mind to the uneasy glances their girlfriends exchanged. Both girls were clearly uncomfortable, warning that they might attract unwanted attention from spirits. But the guys brushed it off, thinking it was all just superstitious nonsense. The road eventually led them to an old, narrow bridge with a single flickering light at the far end. As they crossed it, something unexpected happened. Beneath the light, a dense black mist began to rise from the ground. At first, they thought it might be smoke or fog, but as it began to take shape, terror set in. The mist twisted and condensed until it formed the outline of a figure draped in a tattered black cloak. The shape was tall and thin, resembling a grim reaper, but without the scythe. It hovered just above the ground, and though its face was hidden beneath a dark hood, they could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness. Instantly, fear gripped all of them. Without speaking a word, they accelerated, tearing away from the bridge as fast as their bikes could carry them. As they glanced in their side mirrors, they were relieved to see that the figure was no longer there. But that relief was short-lived. Suddenly, the youngest brother felt his girlfriend clutching him tightly and crying. He glanced behind him and saw the figure was back. This time it was floating directly behind him, its cloak billowing as it followed them. He tried to shake it off by speeding up, but it stayed close as if it were attached to him. The sight sent a wave of icy dread through him, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. As he desperately honked his horn in panic, his brother, who was riding just ahead, saw the figure reappear in his side mirror. But this time, it was closer, reaching out one of its arms. That's when he saw it. Beneath the flowing sleeve, there was a skeletal hand, white as bone, stretching toward him. The fingers were long and bony, clawing at the air as they reached for him. His girlfriend screamed, and he felt paralyzed with fear. For a moment, neither of them could think of what to do, their minds blank with terror. All they could do was push their bikes harder, hoping to outrun whatever it was. Up ahead, they spotted another light post, a beacon of safety in the otherwise endless darkness. They focused on it, praying that the light would somehow break the nightmare. As they drew closer, they clung to the hope that this unholy presence would vanish. With every passing second, the figure seemed to draw nearer, its skeletal hand closing the gap inch by inch. But just as they reached the glow of the streetlight, the figure dissolved into nothingness, evaporating as if it never existed. The air grew warmer, the oppressive chill lifting as the light bathed them in its reassuring glow. The group didn't dare stop until they reached the city, where they finally pulled over, gasping for breath, their faces pale with fear. They recounted what they had seen to each other, their voices trembling as they pieced together the horrific encounter. Even then, none of them could fully comprehend what had just happened. They swore never to take that road again, especially after dark. To this day, neither of my brothers talks much about that night, but whenever they pass by that area during the day, they avert their eyes, pretending not to notice the long shadows that stretch across the old road. And as for the road itself, few dare to travel it at night, not since the stories of that dark figure began to spread. The old mansion by the side of the road. The light moved eerily across the top floor of the decaying mansion, bobbing like it was carried by an invisible hand. For a moment, the kids stood frozen, eyes wide with terror. The rotted floors and broken windows of the old house made it impossible for anyone to walk up there, yet the lantern-like glow swayed back and forth. Just as they turned to flee, a booming voice from behind sent their hearts racing. The farmer had come, but they soon realized that something far more chilling was inside the mansion, watching them from the shadows. Back in the summer of 1966, my family was visiting my grandparents in the rural outskirts of Selwood, Kentucky. My Uncle Benny and Aunt Clara had come up from Baton Rouge with half of their 8 kids to spend the weekend. Of those cousins, only 2 were around my age. Benny Jr. was just a year younger than me at 11, while the eldest, Clara, was 12 like me. The 3 of us loved to explore, taking long walks through the countryside. Grandpa's farm was deep in a quiet, isolated area with fields stretching for miles, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. It was the perfect place to get lost in adventure. That weekend, we decided to walk to a little ice cream shop called Twin Scoop, about a mile from the farm. Our parents gave us a quarter each. Back then, that was enough for a generous cone. Off we went, strolling down the long, lonely road that led to the shop. The route was peaceful, lined with tall trees and pastures where cows and horses grazed lazily. The quiet countryside was a world of its own, far removed from the busy city life. As we made our way back, full from our ice cream and chattering away, we passed by a creepy old mansion set back from the road. It had always been there, hidden among the trees, with its paint peeling and windows shattered. The house stood directly across from an active dairy farm, its decaying grandeur starkly contrasting the neatly kept barns and pastures. Local kids claimed the mansion was haunted, and though we never believed it fully, the place always gave us a strange feeling. That day, curiosity got the best of us. The sun was dipping low in the sky, and the shadows around the mansion seemed to deepen. Despite our nerves, we dared each other to get a closer look. The house looked like something straight out of a ghost story. Whitewashed walls faded to gray, a wraparound porch sagging with age, and tall windows that stared blankly at the world like hollow eyes. The architecture was reminiscent of an old southern estate, maybe once beautiful, but now long forgotten. We carefully approached the porch, knowing it was too fragile to step on. Instead, we found an overturned bucket near the side and climbed on it to peer through one of the windows. Inside, the house seemed frozen in time. Elegant Victorian furniture lay under layers of dust, covered with sheets that had darkened with age. Heavy drapes hung limply, and the grand chandelier above was tangled with cobwebs. Everything inside spoke of a past life, one filled with grandeur and luxury. Just as we were about to leave, a loud scraping noise echoed from above us. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor, furniture perhaps. The noise sent a chill down our spines, and without a word, we jumped off the bucket and took off running. But our fear turned into confused curiosity when we stopped a few yards away and turned back. We needed to know what had made that noise. It was dusk, and the fading light made everything seem even more eerie. That's when we saw it, a faint light moving slowly across one of the upper windows. It flickered as if someone was carrying a lantern, but there was no figure, no one holding it. We could see the light clearly through the broken windows, but the house was supposed to be abandoned. Just as we stood there, too stunned to move, a rough voice barked from behind us. "Hey, what do you kids think you're doing?" We whipped around to see an old farmer approaching, shotgun in hand. He looked more annoyed than threatening, but that didn't stop our hearts from racing. He told us in no uncertain terms that the property belonged to his family and that we were trespassing. We stammered out apologies, then nervously mentioned the light we had seen upstairs. The farmer's face grew serious as he shook his head. "There's no one up there," he said firmly. "This place has been empty for over 60 years. Last folks to live there died off a long time ago. There's no electricity in that house either. You kids are just seeing things." We insisted that all 3 of us had seen the light, but the farmer only grumbled and motioned for us to follow him. To our surprise, he climbed up onto the porch and opened the front door. The porch creaked under his weight, but it held. Hesitantly, we followed, staying close behind him. When he led us inside, what we saw made our blood run cold. The grand staircase we had admired from the window was still there, but it led to nowhere. The upper floors were completely gone, rotted away to the point that only the beams remained. There was no way anyone could have been walking around up there. The stairs themselves were mostly intact, but parts were so decayed that taking even a single step could have been deadly. We stared, dumbfounded, trying to reconcile what we had seen from outside with the reality before us. The farmer's stern expression softened a little as he saw the fear on our faces. "Now you see why it's dangerous to mess around here," he said. "This place has a history, but it's best left alone. Now get on home and don't let me catch you around here again." He walked us back to the road, and we hurried home in silence, too shaken to talk. The rest of the weekend, the three of us whispered about what we had seen, trying to make sense of it. We knew what we had witnessed wasn't our imagination, but how could a light move through a house where there were no floors left to walk on? Years later, I still think about that night. The mansion remains sealed off, surrounded by an electric fence. The dairy farm is still in operation, and a large "No Trespassing" sign hangs on the fence near the road. The mystery of the old mansion lingers, unsolved, leaving us to wonder what truly haunts that place by the side of the road. Driving down the road. The words "heaven is close" flashed in my mind as I came to, drenched in sweat, the eerie silence of the night pressing in on me. My car was somehow running again, headlights illuminating the empty dirt road ahead. I had no memory of how I ended up back inside, and the clock now read 2:30 a.m. Hours had passed since everything went dark. What happened during that lost time? Was it a nightmare, or did something more sinister unfold on that isolated stretch of road? It was a chilly night in late autumn when I found myself driving along the desolate, winding roads just outside of Whitaker Falls, a small, quiet town that practically shut down after sunset. It was nearing 11 p.m., and I was returning home from a late shift at work, eager to collapse into bed. The road I took was a secluded back road that snaked through dense woods, a shortcut I often used to shave time off my commute. The old dirt road had always been a bit unsettling after dark, with towering trees lining either side and not a single streetlight for miles. But that night, something felt different, heavier, darker. I shrugged it off as the usual late-night jitters. The night was still, the kind of stillness where even the crickets fall silent, leaving nothing but the crunch of gravel under my tires. Just as I rounded a particularly sharp bend, my car sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in complete darkness. The headlights flickered out, and the engine went silent. I fumbled for my phone, but of course, there was no signal out here. My flashlight was supposed to be in the glove compartment, but it was gone. Frustrated and a little spooked, I decided to step out and see if I could find help, though I doubted anyone else would be out on this road at this hour. As I stepped onto the dirt road, the silence seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like a cold blanket. I heard footsteps crunching behind me, slow, deliberate. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just the shadows stretching from the trees. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickly bent down to check under the car, praying the noise was just some animal rustling in the leaves. But the footsteps came again, this time closer. Panic started to set in, and I felt an overwhelming urge to get back in the car and lock the doors. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a faint glimmer on the ground a few feet away. My flashlight. It was lying in the dirt, pointing toward a twisted, gnarled tree at the edge of the woods. I grabbed it and switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. Scrawled on the bark of the tree in what looked like chalk were the words, "Heaven is close." My blood ran cold. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. Suddenly, I couldn't move, my legs locked in place. The air around me grew thick, almost suffocating, and I could barely breathe. The flashlight slipped from my trembling hand, and everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was sitting upright in my car. The engine was humming softly, the headlights casting long shadows down the road. Disoriented, I checked the time. 2:30 a.m. Nearly 3.5 hours had passed, but I had no memory of what happened in that gap. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and all I could think was to get out of there as fast as possible. I floored the gas, tires kicking up dirt as I sped away, not daring to look back. When I finally reached home, I locked every door and window and sat in silence trying to piece together what had happened. How did I end up back in the car? Who, or what, wrote those words on the tree? And why was I still alive to tell the tale? The more I think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Was it some sort of warning, or was I just caught in a bad dream? Whatever it was, that road still haunts me. If anyone has had a similar experience or can make sense of this, I'm all ears. Something out there on that lonely road doesn't want to be forgotten. The lonely road. The icy wind cut through the darkness as I saw her again. The same old woman with hollow eyes and a bloodied neck, standing by the roadside in the dead of night. My heart raced as I realized she had somehow appeared ahead of us, miles from where we'd last seen her. As we sped past, she turned to face us, her eerie smile sending a chill down my spine. We fled, but the image of her blood-streaked face is something I'll never forget. That was the night I learned that some roads are haunted by more than just memories. I've always been a fan of horror stories, but I used to think most were just exaggerations, something to thrill and entertain. I never really believed in the supernatural, thinking it was more myth than reality. That all changed one night when I found myself face to face with something I couldn't explain, an encounter that shook me to my core. It was a frigid winter night when my brother needed to catch a late train to another town. The station was about 15 kilometers from our home in Silvercrest, along a desolate stretch of road infamous for its eerie atmosphere and the strange encounters people claimed to have there. Even during the day, the road felt deserted, with thick bushes and towering trees casting deep shadows. By night, it was the last place anyone would want to be. My cousin, who was staying over, offered to join me as I would have to return alone after dropping my brother off. He insisted we take the lonely road on the way back for the thrill, but I refused. The main road was much safer and faster. After all, the stories about the other route were enough to keep anyone away after dark. We reached the station, and after a delay, my brother's train finally arrived. We said our goodbyes, and I was relieved that the night was almost over, or so I thought. As we walked back to the parking area, we noticed an old woman with a gaunt face staring at us. She asked for food, her voice raspy and unsettling. We apologized, saying we had nothing to give, and hurried to my scooter. My cousin brought up the idea of taking the lonely road again, and despite my unease, I reluctantly agreed. I figured having him with me would make it less terrifying. I couldn't have been more wrong. As we started down the dark, narrow road, my nerves began to fray. The wind grew colder, the shadows deeper. My cousin tried to keep my mind off things by talking about his college days, but every rustling leaf and every gust of wind made my heart race. Just as I was beginning to think we might make it home without incident, I saw her, a frail old woman walking slowly in the middle of the road. My cousin brought the scooter to a halt. "Why did you stop?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My eyes widened as I realized it was the same old woman we had seen at the station. My cousin asked her what she was doing out so late on such an isolated road. With a chilling calmness, she responded by asking us the same thing. Her voice was eerily serene, but there was something off about her. As she spoke, we noticed scratches on her neck, deep and blood-stained. It sent a jolt of fear through me. I urged my cousin to leave, and he finally hit the gas, speeding away. A few meters down the road, I glanced back, expecting to see her in the distance, but she was gone. Vanished. There was no way she could have disappeared that quickly. My heart pounded as I tried to process what had just happened. My cousin, now just as frightened as I was, drove faster, nearly causing us to crash over a hump in the road. All we wanted was to get as far away from that place as possible. But the nightmare wasn't over. A few kilometers later, we saw her again, trudging along the side of the road. This time we didn't stop. Didn't dare look at her as we sped past. We only stopped once we reached a small roadside shop near the highway, gasping for breath and trembling with fear. We ordered tea to steady our nerves and told the shopkeeper what we had witnessed. He listened quietly, then told us that about a year ago, the body of an old woman had been found on that road. She had been killed under mysterious circumstances, her neck marred by deep, jagged fingernail marks. The story sent shivers down my spine, confirming that what we encountered was no ordinary woman. We never mentioned the incident to our parents. They would have been furious if they knew we had taken that road. But even now, I break out in a cold sweat whenever I think about that night. It was the first and last time I ever traveled down that cursed path. Haunted Road. The creature's hollow eyes locked onto mine as it emerged from the shadows, a grotesque figure with stringy black hair and a faceless head. Its body moved in one direction while its head remained fixed on me as if defying the laws of nature. The road was silent, but my mind screamed in terror. Whatever it wasn't human, or even fully of this world. That night, as it passed through my car like a mist, I knew this wasn't just a ghost story. Something evil had claimed this road. My house was situated just outside the city limits of a town named Whitebrook, tucked along an old two-lane highway with deep historical roots. Whitebrook had been settled in the late 1760s, making it one of the earliest outposts in the state. The area was steeped in rich, often eerie history, with stories that seemed to stretch back centuries, from tales of Revolutionary War skirmishes to whispered legends of forgotten rituals in the woods. This town had more than its share of hauntings. We lived in a small, three-bedroom house off a narrow one-lane road originally carved out for logging trails. Some locals called it a Ridge Runner Road, supposedly built by moonshiners back in the day. Even now, there were whispers that moonshining operations still hid in the thick woods surrounding us. The neighborhood was old, mostly filled with retired folks, so the nights were dead silent except for the occasional bark of a dog or the chirping of crickets. There was only one street lamp a bit down the road, so when night fell, the darkness was almost suffocating, thick and impenetrable without a flashlight. Up behind our place was another single-lane road lined with a few dilapidated houses, and beyond that, nothing but woods and scattered farmland. The isolation brought a kind of peace, but as we'd soon find out, that peace was a thin veil over something far more sinister. Not long after we moved in during the mid-90s, we began hearing some unsettling stories. The locals would talk in hushed tones about strange sightings and unexplained occurrences. I dismissed most of it as typical Southern folklore, the kind of tall tales people tell around campfires. But my skepticism quickly turned into fear when we had our own encounters. We hadn't been there even a year when the first incident occurred. One night, my older daughter ran into my bedroom, pale as a sheet. She claimed to have heard tapping on the walls outside her room and then on her window. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, so the idea of someone sneaking around seemed unlikely. Her room was dark, so we carefully crept over to her window, squinting through the gloom. There, standing about 7 feet from the window, was a tall, dark figure. It was too slender and too tall to be a normal person. We whispered to each other, trying to recall if there was a tree or large bush in that spot. The moon cast just enough light for us to see the figure, but it was hard to tell if it was someone or something standing there. My husband joined us after noticing I wasn't in bed. He flicked on the hallway light, and I motioned for him to shut it off immediately. When we turned back to the window, the figure had vanished. There wasn't even a tree in that spot, just bare earth. My husband brushed it off as our imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. About a year later, we had to move out of that house. Our landlord's brother had fallen on hard times and needed a place to stay, so we moved on to a plot of land my parents owned, just a mile up the road. They had built a new house there, planning to move in after retirement, and they let us stay while we arranged for a modular home to be placed on the land they gifted us. 6 months later, we were settled into our new place. One evening, my daughter's boyfriend, who would later become her husband, came pounding on our back door. He was pale and visibly shaking. I ushered him inside, and he stammered out his story. While driving on the same road where we used to live near the old house, he saw something horrifying, a tall, slender figure with long, stringy hair and no face. It was walking on the side of the road, moving as if its limbs were out of sync with its body, but its head remained turned toward him, staring with featureless intent. He swore it had no face, just that grotesque head and hair hanging like a shroud. Fast forward about 10 years. I was leaving my daughter's house with my Jack Russell Terrier, Milo, riding in his cage in the back of my car. We were driving the same road, heading home, when it happened. I was talking to my younger daughter on the phone, assuring her we were almost there, when something darted across the road in front of me. It looked like a creature straight out of an old horror movie, a half-wolf, half-human abomination. But what froze me in terror was how it looked directly at me, its eyes glowing with malevolence, yet its form was translucent, almost ghostly. My dog went berserk, barking and growling as I screamed. I braced for impact, but the thing passed straight through my car as if it were made of smoke. Shaking, I pulled over just outside our driveway. I was too afraid to even get out of the car. My daughter rushed outside to help, and we hurried into the house. I never drove down that road at night again. Even during the day, a chill runs down my spine just thinking about it. I still don't know if all these events are connected, but something haunts that stretch of road. Even in broad daylight, there's an air of unease that clings to the area. If you ever find yourself near Whitebrook and someone tells you about the old highway, take their advice. Stay away after dark. The winged man behind the blackberry bushes. It was an event that changed my family's life forever. My name is Arav, and I still shiver whenever I recall that summer day. The terror we experienced led my parents to sell our house and relocate us to the city, imposing a strict rule that we were never allowed outside after dark. When I was about 6 years old, my family moved into an old farmhouse located in the rural heart of Indiana. The property was expansive, featuring a dilapidated barn, cornfields, crabapple and mulberry trees, blackberry and raspberry bushes, and a gun club across the street that was sparsely frequented. The woods lay beyond the blackberry bushes, and the nearest neighbors were a mile down the road. Our large yard was visible from almost every window in the house, and as long as we stayed within the designated play areas, we were free to explore. It was early summer, and I was outside playing alone. I had grown hungry and decided to snack on some ripe blackberries, which my parents permitted. As I gathered a handful of berries, I noticed something unsettling. Among the blackberry bushes stood a man dressed in a wide-brimmed hat and trench coat. He was smiling and gesturing for me to come closer. Confused, I tried to ask him questions, but he only waved and made a strange wheezing noise. My mother, observing from the kitchen window, saw me interacting with the figure. At first, she dismissed it as part of my imaginative play. However, when she saw I was lingering longer than usual, she became concerned and came outside to investigate. She asked me what I was doing, and I pointed to the man in the bushes. Her face turned ashen with fear. She urgently ordered me to go inside and fetch my father. Sensing her fear, I ran towards the house, worried for her safety since she was pregnant at the time. As I sprinted, I heard her scream and something massive crashing through the bushes. An instinct told me not to look up or back, so I kept my eyes on the ground. As I ran, I saw a shadow on the ground, what appeared to be a man with bat-like wings. The next moments are a blur. I remember people arriving at the house asking me questions about the mysterious figure. My sisters and I were made to sleep in the living room while my parents frantically worked to sell the house, which they managed to do before winter. Years later, when I was 18, I watched the movie Jeepers Creepers and was struck by how similar the creature in the film was to the man I had seen. I was about to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination when my mother asked me about the film. As I described how it reminded me of the figure from our farmhouse, I saw her face drain of color. She instructed me never to bring it up again. I still wonder, was there really a creature like the one in the movie? Why didn't it take me when it had the chance? Why was my mother so terrified if it was merely my imagination? I hope someone can offer an explanation or share similar experiences. The Phantom Tailgater. Driving through the dark mountain pass in Arizona, we were in high spirits, laughing and singing along to nostalgic 90s pop hits. My friend Jake and I had just spent an incredible weekend at a music festival in Tucson, and now we were making the long drive back to Colorado. The journey was mostly uneventful, just miles and miles of empty road illuminated by the headlights of our loaded-down SUV. The sun had set hours ago, and the moon barely pierced through the thick canopy of trees that lined the road. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the distant rustling of leaves. We had been on the road for about 3 hours when we hit a particularly desolate stretch of the mountain pass. The air felt heavy, and an eerie sensation crept over me, making the light-hearted music and jokes feel oddly out of place. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, not because I was worried about traffic, but because our vehicle was loaded with camping gear. I wanted to be courteous and let any faster cars pass. The road had been empty for a while, with no sign of other vehicles, when I noticed something unsettling in the mirror. A small, dark sedan had appeared out of nowhere, tailgating us aggressively. Its driver's side headlight was out, and the other one was dim and yellowed, casting a sickly glow. The sedan was so close it felt like it was practically glued to our bumper, less than 10 feet away. The unsettling proximity made me uneasy. I turned to Jake, laughing nervously, and said, "Check out this hole. There's plenty of room to pass us." But when we both turned to look back, the sedan had vanished. The once dark void was now just an expanse of blackness and the blurred outlines of trees. I was momentarily stunned. The road behind us was completely empty. I described the car to Jake, and his face turned pale. He admitted he had felt an unusual sense of unease on that stretch of road as well. We both tried to shake off the encounter, attributing it to fatigue or a trick of the light. But as we continued our drive, the unsettling feeling lingered. The rest of the journey was uneventful, but the phantom tailgater had cast a shadow over our otherwise pleasant trip. The following day, after arriving in Colorado and recounting the tale to friends and family, I started to look into the history of that stretch of road. The eerie experience with the phantom tailgater was unlike anything I had encountered before. I found myself delving into local lore and historical records, hoping to find an explanation for what we had seen. I discovered that the mountain pass was notorious for its treacherous conditions and had been the site of numerous accidents over the years. Local legends spoke of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences on that stretch of road, often involving vehicles that seemed to appear out of nowhere only to vanish just as quickly. Some stories mentioned fatal accidents where drivers had lost control under mysterious circumstances, their vehicles never found. The most chilling account I found was about a fatal accident that occurred decades ago. A young couple had been driving home late at night when their car skidded off the road in the exact area where we had encountered the phantom tailgater. Witnesses claimed the car had been tailgated by a dark sedan before the accident. Though the details were sparse, it was said that the couple's car had vanished from sight before the authorities could reach the scene. These accounts seemed to align with our experience. The unsettling sensation, the aggressive tailgating, and the sudden disappearance of the car all fit into the eerie pattern of ghostly encounters reported in that area. I couldn't help but wonder if the phantom tailgater we encountered was somehow connected to the tragic history of that road. Although the experience was unnerving, it sparked a deep curiosity in me. The phantom tailgater left an indelible mark on my memory, and I continue to be intrigued by the mysteries of that mountain pass. As I explore more about its history and the supernatural legends surrounding it, I can't help but wonder if there are more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Something that followed. The chill in the air that December night was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just the cold of winter, but something deeper and more profound. My name is Rajesh, and I live in Noida, India. I'm recounting an extraordinary incident that occurred in December 2018 during my final year of undergraduate studies. After our exams concluded, my friends and I were looking forward to a 2-week break. We had our tickets ready to head home, but before leaving the hostel, we decided to take a bike ride to pass the time. Our college is situated in the Delhi NCR region, a bustling area known for its crowded streets and constant activity. On that day, we were a group of 4 friends, each sharing a bike. We set out around 6 p.m., bundled up in thick jackets to ward off the harsh cold. The warmth from our jackets, along with steaming cups of tea from a roadside stall, kept us comfortable as we explored the city. By 7:30 p.m., we decided it was time to head back to the hostel. The temperature had dropped even further, so we zipped up our jackets, pulled our winter caps down, and had another round of tea before setting off. As we made our way back, we encountered a massive traffic jam, a common nuisance in India. To avoid being late, we decided to take a shortcut. The shortcut led us to a long, straight road, about 1 kilometer long, flanked by barren land on either side. This isolated stretch of road was deserted, save for us. Halfway down this desolate road, something inexplicable happened. The temperature plummeted drastically. It felt as though an icy wave had engulfed us. The drop was so severe, over 10 degrees Celsius in mere seconds, that it left us paralyzed. The cold was intense, extending over a stretch of 200 to 300 meters. Then, just as abruptly, the temperature normalized. We stopped and exchanged bewildered glances, all four of us having felt the same chilling drop. With the hostel gates closing soon, we hurried back to our dorm. The incident was unsettling, but didn't seem to warrant much concern at the time. We didn't discuss it further, preoccupied with our upcoming journeys home. Little did I know, this strange encounter was only the beginning. The following evening, after a long and exhausting journey, I finally arrived home. The familiar comfort of my house was a welcome relief after the grueling trip. My mother and I were the only ones at home. My father was away on a business trip. That night, as I was about to fall asleep, I was abruptly awoken by my mother's cries of distress from her bedroom. I rushed to her side and found her clutching her blanket tightly, her face etched with fear. She explained that she had been reading when she felt the edge of her bed creak, as if someone had climbed onto it. Initially, she dismissed it, thinking it was her imagination. But then she felt a strong pull on her blanket, as though an unseen force was trying to snatch it away. The sensation was so real that she could not ignore it. What made the situation even more unsettling was the appearance of fine sand and dust particles on one side of the bed. Our family has a strict tradition of changing clothes before touching the bed to keep it clean, so the presence of this sand was baffling. The windows were tightly shut to keep out the winter chill, and there was no construction or disturbance in the area that could explain the sand. As I examined the bed, I noticed that the sand seemed to increase, spreading more with each passing moment. We changed the bedsheet and the activity ceased. Despite our fear, we prayed and managed to sleep in the same room until my father returned. My mother, who had experienced paranormal occurrences before, suggested we accept this as part of life and not panic. She believed that the entity meant no harm. I kept this incident to myself, fearing disbelief from my hostile friends. We never spoke about the temperature drop on the deserted road, so I'm unsure if any of my friends encountered similar phenomena afterward. What links these two incidents is the sparkling yellow sand. That night at home, the sand on my bedsheet was yellow and sparkling. I recalled that the jeans I wore during the shortcut incident were also covered in the same yellow sparkling sand. It was an eerie coincidence that connected the chilling experience on the deserted road with the unsettling events that followed at home. The weeks following the incident were filled with an unsettling sense of foreboding. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that desolate road to my home. I became increasingly obsessed with understanding the mysterious connection between these two occurrences. I started researching local folklore and consulting with friends who had knowledge of supernatural occurrences. I discovered that certain areas in and around Noida and Delhi NCR are believed to be haunted by spirits or entities linked to unexplained phenomena. Some of these spirits are said to leave behind traces of strange substances, like yellow sand or dust, which are believed to be remnants of their presence. I learned that the road we took that night had a history of being associated with eerie occurrences. Locals spoke of sudden temperature drops and mysterious sensations reported by travelers. It seemed that the road itself might have been a gateway or a location of significant paranormal activity. There were accounts of travelers experiencing inexplicable phenomena, and some claimed to have seen apparitions or felt a strange presence while traversing that road. To further explore the connection, I visited the area with a few friends who were interested in paranormal investigations. We spent a night in the vicinity, hoping to gather any evidence or experiences that might explain the strange occurrences. We set up equipment to measure temperature changes and recorded any unusual activities. While we didn't experience anything overtly paranormal that night, the sense of unease lingered, and the yellow sand remained a haunting reminder of the unexplained events. The experience left me deeply unsettled and fascinated. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that desolate road to my home. Whether it was a residual energy, a spirit, or simply a figment of my imagination, the connection between the chilling road and the strange occurrences at home remains a mystery. The sparkling yellow sand became a symbol of that enigma, a reminder of a night that blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural. I continue to ponder the events of that night and the peculiar coincidences that tied them together. The search for answers has become a part of my life, and I remain curious about the hidden truths that might lie behind the inexplicable phenomena I encountered. The face in the old shed window. One crisp evening in late autumn, the air was still and unnervingly cold as I made my way towards the old shed on my great-grandparents' farmstead. The farm, nestled deep in the heart of the woods, had been in our family since the late 1920s. It was a sprawling property featuring a grand main house, a vast hayfield, a well-tended garden, and a serene lake, accessible by a steep, winding trail that passed by the shed. The farm held a significant place in my childhood memories, but by the time of the incident I am about to recount, it had changed dramatically. My great-grandmother had passed away in 1999, and my great-grandfather followed her in 2011. Their absence left the farm to me, now a 17-year-old with a burgeoning curiosity about the unknown. It was a year after my great-grandfather's death when the unsettling encounter occurred. At that age, I was skeptical about anything supernatural, dismissing such tales as mere folklore. Little did I know that this evening would challenge my disbelief. The shed itself was a dilapidated relic, once a tool storage area, but now more of an eyesore. Its windows were covered with old, tattered sheets that fluttered in the breeze, creating an eerie, ghostly appearance. One of the sheets had been torn and twisted into a ghastly visage that seemed to scream in silent agony. The door was always padlocked, adding to the shed's aura of mystery and making it an ever-present enigma in the landscape of our family history. It was around 6:30 p.m., with enough twilight remaining to see clearly, but with the encroaching darkness adding to the sense of foreboding. I was bored, having spent the day in aimless pursuits, and decided to take a walk down to the lake to clear my mind. As usual, my gaze fell upon the shed, its presence always managing to creep me out. I had often wondered about the stories and secrets it might hold, but I had never ventured closer. That evening, as I glanced at the shed's door, something peculiar stopped me in my tracks. The air around me seemed to grow colder, a stark contrast to the layers of coats I wore. I felt an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. My breath misted in the air as I stared at the window on the shed's door. There, framed by the torn sheet, was a face. It was not like any face I had ever seen. The features were distorted, unsettling, and haunting. The face had an unnerving feminine structure, but the eyes were the most disturbing part. Black, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me, searching my soul with an intensity that was both horrifying and mesmerizing. The bottom corner of the sheet had been ripped away, allowing the horrifying visage to be revealed more clearly. I stood frozen, a paralyzing fear gripping me. My body felt like it was encased in ice, unable to move or scream. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of the old farmstead. It was only when I heard a sharp snap of a tree branch behind me that I broke free from my trance. My instinct was to flee, and without a second thought, I sprinted towards the safety of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Once inside, I locked all the doors and windows, refusing to step outside for the rest of the night. The warmth of the house did little to ease the cold fear that had settled in my bones. I recounted the incident to my family, but their response was dismissive. They attributed it to the darkness and my overactive teenage imagination, suggesting it was merely a trick of the light or an effect of the shadows. There had been no deaths on the property before my great-grandmother's passing, and she had not died on the farm. The locked door of the shed, however, suggested that no one could have entered to play a prank. The experience marked the beginning of my skepticism about the supernatural fading away. I began referring to the apparition as the face in the shed, a name that felt both fitting and unsettling. The months and years that followed were marked by an uneasy sense of anticipation. I never saw the face again, but the memory lingered, casting a long shadow over my perception of the old shed. My family eventually decided to sell the property, and it is now in the hands of new owners. I often wonder if they have encountered the same unsettling presence, or if the shed remains a silent witness to a haunting that refuses to let go. In an effort to understand the strange occurrence, I delved into the history of the area. Um, I learned that many old structures in the region were rumored to be haunted, with stories of apparitions and ghostly encounters dating back centuries. The old farmstead, with its long history and secluded location, was no exception. Local legends spoke of spirits lingering near abandoned buildings, and some claimed that these entities were bound to the places where they had once lived or died. My investigation led me to explore other similar accounts, and I discovered that the phenomena I experienced were not isolated. Reports of ghostly faces and eerie sightings in rural areas were not uncommon, often linked to places with a long history or tragic past. The sparkling dust and unsettling cold I had felt were consistent with other reported hauntings, where supernatural entities left behind physical evidence of their presence. Despite my efforts to uncover more about the face in the shed, I never found a definitive explanation. The experience remained a profound and haunting mystery, a reminder of the thin boundary between the known and the unknown. The old shed, with its eerie face and chilling presence, continues to be a symbol of that unsettling encounter. The new owners of the property might never know the full story, but for me, the face in the shed remains an indelible mark on my understanding of the supernatural. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.